So let's move on back to occurrence-based policies. So occurrence-based policies cover the nurse for any injuries arising out of incidents that occur during the time the policy was made into effect. All right, so this is from the American College of Physicians website. I just want to talk more about occurrence-made policies because I think it's really important to understand it. So medical malpractice insurance is a specialized type of professional liability insurance. It covers physicians. We also have ones for nurses, okay? It's usually available through traditional insurance carriers or from a medical risk retention group. And that's a mutual organization of medical professionals. So they have ones for nurses that are specific. Some large medical systems are self-insured. Instead of purchasing commercial insurance, a medical liability trust fund is created to pay the defense. And that trust fund is going to be larger for physicians than it will be for nurses. So just keep that in mind when they consider you as a liability and how much they're willing to spend on you. And more with our scope of practice increasing, they are going after nurses. So just keep that in mind. Individual and group malpractice coverage plans are available to those independent and small practice. Okay. So it's important to understand the two basic types. There's claims made and occurrence. A claims made policy will only provide coverage if the policy is in effect both when the incident took place and when a lawsuit's filed. So think about this, okay? So that's claims made. January 1st, 2018, you accidentally, I'm trying to think of a good example. You let someone's heparin drip go on 2 extra hours without checking a PTT. They end up having an adverse bleeding effect, and you get sued, okay? Now, if the claims, and then the lawsuit doesn't get filed to the next year, because remember there's a statute of limitations. If your claims made policy, the coverage is not in effect, you bought it maybe in February, and the lawsuit was filed the following March, but the incident took place in January, you're not going to get covered, okay? As can be seen, this requires that coverage needs to extend a significant period of time, because don't forget there's statutes of limitation. Because of this, some claims made policies are written to provide coverage referred to as tail. We talked about that. That extends coverage for a set amount of time, usually 5 years after a policy ends. If not offered as part of the original policy, tail coverage can also be purchased. Usually when you switch jobs, oftentimes you'll buy a tail coverage. But it's extremely important in situations where you've been covered with a claims-made policy, but are changing carriers or moving to a new position or retiring to ensure continued malpractice coverage during this transition. So occurrence policies differ from claims-made insurance that they cover any claim for any event that took place during the period of coverage, even if the claim itself is filed after the policy lapses. So that's great, right? So, you know, something happens January 1st, you pay your insurance through March 1st, and then the following year you get sued, you're still going to be covered during that time. And so that's the difference with occurrences, okay? And these are really, I know this seems so lame, you guys are going to be like, Denise, seriously? But they have really great examples if you look on the actual insurance websites, because they want you to be as fully educated as possible. And then also you can go on like the ANA website and look on the blogs. I'm not going to tell you go ahead and buy private insurance coverage. I don't have it for my time as an RN. Sometimes I think, man, I should get it. Not because I made mistakes, but just because you never know what can come up. And statutes of limitations, who knows how long they are for different claims, right? And think about the times that something bad has happened with a physician. Fingers can be pointed at you. Remember, it's alleged or true. So you have to be really careful. So there's something here about tall coverage. And that's good if the claim occurred while the practitioner was practicing on behalf of the practice, or the practitioner was notified that the claim was pending while the practitioner was engaged in that practice. Okay. So here's that claims made policy that we talked about. It provides coverage only if the claim for an injury that has occurred is filed with the courts and is reported to the insurance company during the active policy period or during an uninterrupted extension of that policy period. So individual, group, and employer-sponsored coverage. So individual groups or employer-sponsored coverage is the broadest type of coverage and specific to the individual policyholder. Institutions should supply a certificate of insurance for their nurses that specify the institution's policy. And you have every right to get that policy and to look through it because you want to see what's covered, what's not, how much your liability is. I mean, if a nurse's liability is $5 million, that might make you double check or double take on how much you're going to get. And also, if the liability insurance that they have there offers, lost wages compensation and lawyers compensation, I will say most companies aren't going to do that, but your union might if you belong to one. So it's definitely important to look at those things. Okay, so moving on. Declarations. This is the first part of the policy. It features the policy's name, address, covered professional occupation, covered time period, the company's limits of liability, and state requirements for information. The coverage agreement. Coverage agreement outlines the types of claims that will be covered. Coverage extensions outline additional protections that a policy affords the policyholder. So remember we talked about that. Like homicide or discrimination, there's a lot of exclusion for that. Not to say that you guys are going to do that or some. And again, when we talk about getting liability coverage and what's excluded and what's not, this isn't about if someone's guilty or not, right? This is about just what gets covered in liability. But for example, say you have two people, you are triaging during a disaster. You have an African American person who is basically bled out, and you have a Caucasian person who has a chance of being fixed. So remember we talked about disaster management and triaging. So we do it with colors. So if somebody's bled out or basically unsavable, they get black tagged, right? And we just don't work on them because you're going to use disaster resources for something that's pretty much futile. But you could be sued for discrimination. If the insurance exclusion says we don't cover discrimination cases, regardless of the fact that you're in the right, you will be hanging out to dry. So you want to make sure that you are really specific with your insurance company when you're reading the language and saying you need to fix that. Now, if I'm found guilty, then, I'm responsible for that money. Limits of liability usually have language about 2 separate dollar figures that indicate what the insurance company will pay during a given policy period. Deductibles include any amount that the insurance carrier deducts from the total amount available to pay for plaintiff damage. Exclusions are items not covered in the insurance policy and frequently describe circumstances or activities that will prevent coverage of the insured party. So reservations of rights is the general title where exclusions may be covered in the policy. And so you can look. Reservation of rights, nursing insurance policy. Let's see if there's any of them. Malpractice insurance, what you need to know. This is a good scholarly article that you guys actually can have access to. So this talks about the claims made policy, occurrence policies. Does your policy coverage match your practice? How are the premiums set? Comparison shopping. Looking for a consent to settle cause. What to look for in a carrier. Who pays for defense? So here's some really good information on this. Exclusion. Common examples of excluded activities, criminal actions. We talked about the incidents occurring while under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And that is tricky, right? Because you will rarely find a policy that actually doesn't have this exclusion. And so you will not be protected. If you were the instigator of physical assault, sexual abuse, molestation, actions that violate state nursing practice acts. So that's kind of tricky too, right? Because right away you're already negligent or malpractice. So you have to be really careful about the wording, and you might want to read into it more. Okay, so here are some more exclusions. Transmission of AIDS, HIV from healthcare provider to a patient. So it is against the law to prohibit a healthcare provider with AIDS, HIV to work with patients. However, you will not be covered for whatever a patient sues you for if you were to transmit some sort of communicable disease. So any claims or suits resulting from practice of a profession that does not appear on the certificate's declaration, you will get in trouble. You will be liable for.